this presentation is simple ways to optimize Drupal's page load times. Alright, so this is who I am. I'm an 8th grade Geography B champion. That was the highlight of my life in 1993. I've been doing websites since 2001. I've been doing Drupal for about 6 years. I started in version 5.3 or 5.3. I'm a sysadmin by trade, like I'm a system administrator, but we're going to talk a little bit about front-end stuff. And I'm a speed freak. That's Keanu Reeves running in the movie Speed. Just to illustrate this from an explosion. So this is how I'm going to organize. I actually have 57 slides, so it's going to be kind of rapid fire here. I have intentionally crappy memes and intentionally crappy graphics. So don't judge me by my crappy graphics. We're going to talk about why does website speed matter. We're going to do back-end tuning and caching, Drupal tuning, and then finally some of the front-end stuff. And we're going to have a bunch of resources at the end right here too. So this is hilarious because anyway.
Because it's true.
Yeah. Yes, because it's 100% true. So everybody here probably knows why it's important. Here, man, have a seat. I'm putting this over there. You're the only one who don't have a seat. You can Google, page speed, I don't know, quotes or statistics and stuff like that, and come up with a list of these. I like to kind of correlate it to money because slow websites lose you money. So reading this right here, half a second to a search result decreases your page traffic by 20%, according to Google. Amazon, every 100 milliseconds of load time, decreased sales by 1%. That's a lot right there. So this is this convoluted little graph. This is from Walmart.com, and the performance engineer from Walmart.com gave a presentation in some San Diego performance user group. So this right here is this red is your conversion level right there. And you can see your conversion level is high when your load time is low. The blue lines are their audience. So you can see like most of their audience loads in about 2 to 3 seconds. They have a bunch of audience that loads in over 15 seconds. Those people are probably on dial-up. But look at the drop-off in conversion rates on Walmart.com when you go from 0 to 1 second. That's about a half. Right there. If they can make their load time less than a second, their sales are going to more than double. And it goes down. It's very exponential right there. So you guys already know that because that's why you're here. So it's even more so for mobile. So all right, 97% of mobile response time happens on the front end. So I'm going to explain. Does everybody know the difference between the front end and the back end?
Yeah.
All right, cool. Show of hands here. How many people are back-end Drupal developers? All right. How many people are like kind of site builders and Drupal people like that? Me. That's me. How many people are front-end themers, front-end developers? A couple. That's me also. You're not invited.
You're packed.
Yeah. I gave out my last chair. You can sit in the garbage can.
Okay.
So. With mobile, you're not just competing with other sites, you're competing with mobile apps. And we're mobile website developers. I want people to go to my website. I don't want them to download apps. And I think people don't want to have to download apps. Who wants to download an app to go to Walmart? It's no. And so, everybody, especially all the front-end developers, they hear the term mobile first. From so many different, like Luke Roblowski and so many different mobile developers. But mobile first, you have to take into account performance too. It's really, really important. But you guys know this. So start thinking about performance at the design stage. That's important. This Dave Olson, he is a really smart developer at West Virginia University who writes books. So we're going to talk about back-end development right here. And this is me. So if I tell you something and your site blows up, well, too bad. I can't really help you with that. Yes! Yeah. So keep it simple right here. So rule number one, if you have a slow site that shouldn't be slow, don't throw more crap at it, fix the problem. And I'm going to talk about some of that more crap coming up. But I wanted to kind of get into this first. So troubleshoot the actual issue. And I'm going to show you some resources about this in the coming up right here. If it's an application, if it's a slow query, if it's a database, if it's a hardware. Hardware can be an issue, especially on what do you call them? The cloud computers, like disk access. They throw so many servers on the single server, and the server's hard drives have trouble keeping up. So tuning your web server right here. I'm just going to talk a little bit about the web server and database. So a lot of people use Nginx. Nginx is a web server very similar to Apache. It's evidently very fast. I'm not too familiar with it. But one thing that's really important with Apache has a value in the http.conf. Was it max clients? Yeah, that's right. Sorry. And so by default, I think it's set to 150 or 250, which is crazy because Drupal can use up a lot of memory. Drupal's memory, depending on the size of your site, can be 30 megabytes, 40 megabytes, maybe even 100 megabytes if you're doing something a little crazy. So basically what this can do is it can cause your operating system to use the swap space. As soon as your operating system touches the hard drive, it starts moving stuff around. And as soon as you get movement into it, well then you have something, as soon as you rely on something spinning, it's like a hamster wheel in there. This is a quick calculation. I'm going to show you a cool, I'm not going to go into this too much, but here's kind of an example. 4 gigabytes minus the operating system minus MySQL divided by your Drupal process, which you can find using the top command, and equals about 15. So database. Database is kind of where everything kind of starts. So there's this cool script right here at MySQLtuner.pl. And if you go to that, it's actually going to pull up a Perl script. And you download that, you can wget that Perl script directly from your command line. You can run it, and it's not going to screw stuff up for you. But what it will do is it will analyze your database, it will analyze your my.cnf, and it will give you a whole bunch of really good recommendations on things where to start. So you can say, like, all right, it's saying to adjust this value right here based on this. Well, I can Google that and find out a little bit more, and you can play around with it. If you're setting up something from the beginning, Percona Configuration Wizard, it's basically a questionnaire. It'll say, well, what type of thing are you going to run here? How much server memory do you have? It'll ask you this multi-step form, and it'll output a my.cnf file for you to look at. So InnoDB is a database engine. By default, Drupal 7 uses InnoDB, and Drupal 6 does not. You can convert that to InnoDB. There's a value in your my.cnf that should pretty much always be increased. The InnoDB buffer size. What's up? And the InnoDB buffer size. So that if you can have your database buffering into memory, so it's not in the hard drive. Once again, these little platters are not spinning around as much, and it's faster. Then you got your MySQL query cache. When if you got a hit in that, it saves a lot of time. And MySQL you can set it to log your slow queries. So this is basically all the server type stuff that you should do. There's a whole bunch more, and I'm gonna give you a couple websites where I could give a whole presentation just on server-based stuff, and it would take up a lot more time. But this is kind of like an introduction. So this is a normal hosting environment right here. You have me going through your Apache, going through PHP. You got Drupal, and then you got your database MySQL. So we're going to talk about some caching. All enterprise level Drupal websites use some type of external caching. Well, pretty much all of them do. So the first things that I'm going to look at is Redis and Memcache. So setting these up is, once again, a whole other presentation and book where I talk about what it does is it will cache your database queries that it talks to. It will cache your database queries between Drupal and MySQL, and that obviously protects your database. So if I'm going all this way right down here, and if I can skip this last point before going back and give my data back up here, well, that's going to save time. Redis and Memcache do very, very similar things. Redis is a little bit newer. Memcache is a little bit more stable. Memcache is typically used with Drupal 6. Redis, there's a Redis module used with Drupal 7. But it can be, I believe, either or. I don't know if there's a Redis module for D6. Pantheon uses Redis. So the next piece of caching is APC. You can see it like there. Even though it's a little icon I threw up there, it does a lot. What APC does is it saves Apache from having to go down to the hard disk and read all these PHP files and then interpret them. Instead, what it will do is it will store everything in memory. Once again, you're not touching the hard drive. That's important right there. APC, if used improperly, can actually slow you down. You have to edit your INI file, apc.ini, and make sure that your memory size, it's called shim size, I don't know why it's called that, is set to what you're actually using. And what you want to do is you want to make sure your hits are up or around 100. And if it's not that, you can increase it and continue playing around with that. So reverse proxy caching. There's a session later in the day on Varnish. And I should have probably told you what room that is, but it's on your schedule. So what Varnish will do, or any reverse proxy, is it will set between me and Apache and the web server. It'll set all the way between the server. And what it will do is, after I go all this way and back up, it will actually remember that. So the next person who looks just like me, they will just talk to Varnish, which sits in memory, and talk back. So it skips this whole level right here, and they can take any type of 10-second page load down to under a second. Content delivery networks. So kind of like Varnish on steroids, and it does a whole bunch of extra things for you. You sign up for a CDN service. Cloudflare is pretty inexpensive. There's all types of modules and tutorials on how to do that. And what happens is it will cache all your data, similar to what Varnish does, and it will actually locate that in servers closer to you, which is important in the whole latency war. I'm going to talk a little more about this. Is my favorite slide in the whole thing. It actually took me it took me a little while to come up with this.
Clever.
Thank you. Who said that? You sir deserve a book. Sorry, everybody else. All right, the performance admin. This seems pretty simple. Have you guys have pretty much all seen this, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's not. Things do things that you don't quite expect. So this checkbox right here, cache pages for anonymous users. It does pretty much what it says. I like that. Cache pages for anonymous users stores entire HTML in the cache database table, or Memcache or Redis, and it enables Varnish or browser caching. Caching blocks. So basic caching for blocks. Note that your views blocks must be explicitly enabled for caching. People may not realize that. We're going to talk about views caching in a bit. Minimum cache lifetime. The amount of time before page cache is cleared. No, this needs to be enabled for block cache. Now I didn't know that, and I did a whole bunch of just trial and error testing to make sure everything worked the way I thought it was when I was preparing the slide. And block caching wasn't working unless I set this to something. So I don't even know what the heck's up with that. Expiration of cache pages. What this does is this sets an HTTP header. It doesn't actually expire anything within the database. It doesn't expire your Drupal cache or anything like that. It sets an HTTP header that Varnish or your browsers will pay attention to. So compressed cache pages, what this will do is this will use Drupal to basically compress all your HTML before it sends it to the browser. Now sometimes hosts will automatically do that, and if it does, you can uncheck that, but I'll show you how to check if that's being done there. So these are really important right here, aggregate and compress CSS. So we're going to talk about what these will do is these will combine all your CSS and all your JavaScript from a million files into just a couple. And that's really important for HTTP headers, which we're going to talk about on the later part of this slide, or at this presentation. Views caching. So this is the advanced, what do you call it, pane that's hidden by default because of the new Views UI, which is actually really good. So to get through it, you edit your view, and you have to hit the little advanced button, and it'll drop down. So within here, you have your little caching right down there. So you have two options in here, query results or rendered results, or rendered output. So your query results do exactly what you think it's going to do. It's going to run your SQL query, and when it runs, it's going to cache the output of that SQL query for 1 minute, 1 hour, whatever the heck you want. Your rendered output cache doesn't quite do exactly what you think it does. What your rendered output will do is it will, if you set your query result to 0, your rendered output to 6 hours, every time you run this view, it will actually query the database. And it will check the result from that and compare it to what it has. And if it's exactly the same, it will output the rendered output. If it's different, it will actually change your value. It will actually re-render everything. So that can be useful. It can be a little bit misleading too. Oh, back in here, there's something that I didn't. There's a module called Views Content Cache, and I didn't put this up there, but it does a lot of content-aware caching, where you can have it flush caches when new nodes or taxonomy terms are created and stuff. Block caching right here, do not cache. So in your views, you can cache your blocks for all those different options up there. You can see per role, per user, which is obviously really, really important for authenticated sessions. So you're not running all those database queries. All right, so I spent Photoshop on this. If you look closely, there's little hash marks in the contrib. Thank you. So, all right, so this is a website I'll reveal in a bit. It's called Beware of the Unknown Codebase. So I've seen cases in a couple different, where I'm coming in after a developer, and they have everything under the sun enabled or done, and I don't want to go back in and rip out a module, afraid the whole thing's going to come down in shambles. So this website right here, this is actually the Florida Drupal Camp website, which got passed on through a couple different Drupal camps. And this is the list of just enabled modules. I'm going back now. So all in all, there were like 180 odd modules enabled. I was looking at it like we're hosting on Pantheon. I was like, man, maybe it's supposed to be fast, And I went through and I took out 20 modules before I, low-hanging fruit. So, long story short, modules are not bad, but if you put 183 of them on your website, it's going to slow stuff down. And so the question is what's the limit? And the answer is, it depends. I'm completing kind of a small website for a nonprofit right now. I got like 50 modules, maybe a little bit less than 50 modules. And, that's a good chunk of modules. Drupal is kind of a framework. You guys ever heard like the framework versus content management system argument that Drupal has? It's kind of a framework where it's meant to be, the Drupal core is meant to be lean and mean, and you're supposed to add this stuff on. It's so modular. It's awesome. But, beware of bloat, and it's just something that you need to take into consideration. But not all modules are bad. There's a lot of modules that will lend you a hand. Look at that, just like that. This is Drupal, and this is the lending module. In case you don't get that. So, all right, views like pages. So every time you're using a pager on a view, everybody uses pagers on the views. It will say, first page of 10, this page of 10, or whatever, so many results. And every time it does this, it does a count. It has to count all your results in your database. And if you have thousands of thousands, tens of thousands, it can really slow down your database queries. So views like pager is a module. It adds this little option right here. And what that does is it just doesn't do that. So you have a next and previous button on there, but it doesn't tell you, you're at page 2 of a million or anything like that. That's a simpler SQL query. It's faster. All right. Do you have lots of anonymous traffic and are on a crappy host? I kind of am. So the boost module, this is not from their website, but anyway, I Googled image search boost, and that came up. I'm like, yes. So boost kind of does what varnish does. It will actually, and it works super well for being such a complex module. But what it does is it will take your rendered HTML that Drupal works so hard on creating, and it will just store this in a little file in a folder in your Drupal site directory. And what you do is you rewrite you put some rules in your htaccess file, and it'll look for that first, and if it doesn't see it, then it will talk to Drupal and create it, and the next person that goes it will actually see will actually get the boost output. So the logic of this is that the internet, the ugly guy on the internet will talk to Apache, which will skip Drupal and will load the HTML directly out of there, and it'll skip Drupal and it'll skip your database. Awesome. Auth-cache. Do you have lots of authenticated traffic slowing down your server? Auth-cache. Auth-cache is a beast. I played around with it. It's kind of complicated, and I think it's maybe in either alpha or beta or something in Drupal 7. Basically, your page will be loaded quickly, and then all the custom stuff will come a little bit later with an AJAX query. And if you guys can read this from all the way in the back, good. Entity cache. Do you have complex data types slowing down your database? Well, entity cache baby for you. Entity cache for smaller websites, it's not going to provide too much of a benefit. It works really great with scaling. It works a lot with like if you have complex data types and references and all that type of stuff. There's a good discussion that happened recently on the high performance groups.drupal.org group. If you guys are interested in that, right there. And these slides will obviously be posted. All right. Do you have large images sucking up your precious bandwidth? So there's a module called Image API Optimize. And what this will do is this will take all your pings and your JPEGs, take it to an external service or whatever, and it will basically losslessly optimize it. So it'll take out all that EXIF data and metadata and everything like that, and kind of make it really, smaller. All right, modules to help troubleshoot your Drupal performance issues. That's obviously just some stupid image. So Devel has the query log, XHProf support, which you have to have installed on the server and it's a pain in the butt. A page timer, it will tell you how long your page takes to generate. The first step in troubleshooting your problem is recognizing that you have a problem. And that's by putting up a page timer and seeing how long it generates. It will also tell you your memory usage, which is really, really cool. This is a good module that will do a whole bunch of performance logging and monitoring. And it enables really great performance logs. It can log directly to the database. You want to do this on your dev server because and live sites, all that logging takes a lot of effort. But it can log to Memcache, APC, or other different caching servers, which are a lot faster. All right, so front-end performance. This is really, really important. A lot of people don't know about this. All right, 80 to 90% of the end-user response time is spent on the front end. Start there. Steve Souders he's like the lead performance engineer at Google, and I don't know if he has this car, but he can probably afford this car. And he has a great website, and a lot of it's way above my head, but just kind of reading it is kind of enlightening. So you talk about the performance golden rule. I'm gonna show you Chrome tools. We're gonna do a demo of Chrome tools toward the end. So everything until you get these first little. So this is all. If you guys aren't familiar with this, this is all. You have your time over here, and then you have these are a list of all your files that you're downloading. So this is the time to get your first file. And this right here is all server time. So after you get all your server time, then it starts, downloading your CSS, your JavaScript, which then in turn are parse and load images, and at the end maybe some other crap. And but if you look at this green line right here is when your downloads in your browser. That's when you can actually see stuff. So you can see the majority of time right here is spent on the front end. And I think people think page speed, back end, no. So there's a couple different, maybe like 4 different categories in improving your front-end performance. Talking about HTTP, oh, hold on, I hit a button. Shouldn't do that.
Shouldn't hit buttons.
Yeah, I hit the laser button.
Especially big lasers.
I like lasers. All right, so first thing I want to talk about is limiting your HTTP requests. So every time you go to a website, your website is going to consist of your HTML and maybe 20 to 50 to 100 other documents or other files. And these other files are CSS files, or JavaScript files, they're images, they're fonts, they're other types of random crap that you might have up there. So these, when you're looking at Google Chrome tools right here, these are all, every single one of these lines right here is an HTTP request. And you can see right here, this is the total. This is the number right here you want to minimize right here, because every time that your browser has to talk to the server, there's a whole bunch of complex stuff going on. I'll take a little bit of time. You have a whole handshake and communication that says, I want this file, and then it has to come back down the same way. And that can really kill your latency. So this is a really great quote right here from a really smart guy, and if you're into CSS, this is a man. So the fastest HTTP request is the one that's not made. That makes a lot of sense. Modern browsers are limited to only 6 parallel connections per host. So what this means is if you have 36, or let's call it 60 HTTP requests, well, you can only have 6 downloading at the same time from from one host. So you're going to have like kind of 10 different channels. Of course, it's not going to be exactly in order like that, but it's just something to keep in mind. You need to design and theme your website with that in mind. You need to, when you're in the design process, you need to think about, how is this going to affect the front-end performance? And there's a lot of different ways to kind of minimize this type of stuff. There's image sprites, there's inline images, and icon fonts, and a bunch of other stuff, and I'm going to talk about some of that. So number one, aggregate your damn CSS and JavaScript. I've looked at some, like enterprise-level websites that are, run by big corporations, and I, of course, always view source to kind of look. And I see that all these things are a little differently. I'm like, what the heck, that's dumb. Check these. It will save you 10, 20 HTTP requests. That's a lot of time. That adds up to seconds, you know. And if you remember that chart from Walmart back then, that turns into money. So let's talk about CSS image sprites. So what a CSS image sprite is you'll have your CSS and it'll be loading background images for icons or for background pictures or for gradients, which is new ways to do all that type of stuff. But there's ways to combine all that into one image. The way that it works is it uses the CSS's background position property to move the background image into the correct placement. And it's a complete pain in the ass, but it's worth it. But if you're using Sass and Compass, which if you're a CSS dev, you should be doing. There's a presentation going on right now about Sass and Compass, and there's actually, I think, one coming up after. There's 2 presentations on Sass and Compass in this camp. It's really cool technology.
What if you have to support IE8? Because it also uses background image size, which IE8 just does not respect at all.
Yeah, you're right. There's ways to do your sprites without the background image size. By spacing out, and I don't know if Sass and Compass can handle this, but
Not that I'm aware of.
space out. IE8 sucks. Space out your images literally like a whole bunch, you know, until you have a whole bunch of clear space. You know, so say your sprite is this big, and you have a little icon here, a little icon there, a little icon there, a little icon there, and then you're not going to see all of it. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I do. Is the increase, because that's going to increase your file size, is the increase in file size worth the reduction in the
I would say yeah, because I don't think I would have to really experiment with it, but I don't think the increase in file size would be all that much because you're not putting any type of data in there. It's just placement, really, you know. And with like PNGs, JPEGs, and GIFs, whatever you're using, you know, they're automatically compressed in their own, you know, compressions, and I would have to play around with it, but I wouldn't think it would be more than a couple kilobytes.
I mean, will Sass do the spacing out?
I don't know.
Not that I'm aware of.
Yeah, and there might be some type of weird Compass plugin or something that can do it for you. I actually use a different method, and I'll tell you about that. Inline images in CSS. Did you know, notice how it's by itself, that you can embed images in HTML and CSS, and you know IE8 supports this.
IE6 supports that.
Does it? Yeah, it goes all the way back to IE7. But yeah.
There's
Cool. I learned something. So basically, you take this awesome, really semantic markup, and it turns into this. So I put IE8 and only, but he's saying IE6, and I kind of believe him. I got that off of, I don't know, maybe caniuse.com or something like that. One thing that is important though is if your images are over 32K, correct me if I'm wrong, I will not support that. But you know, most icons are like around 10K, you know, 20K, you're usually going to be fine. Just don't do like all crazy big pictures. So you can embed your images in HTML and CSS. So it saves an HTTP request. That's what we're doing, right? The fastest one is the one I made. Happy face. But it makes your CSS or HTML file longer. File size. Sad face.
You have to be really careful with IE8 and the file size on CSS files, because IE8 will simply refuse to load any CSS files bigger than 256 kilobytes, which becomes a problem when you start aggregating them.
I didn't know that. That's a really good thing. I'm going to have to play around with that. I know that it has a 31 or 32 CSS limitation right there.
Yep, and it restricts based on the file size. I think it's 256 kilobytes. I found that out when I had my Sass outputting debug data, and so the file got converted.
That's something that needs to be taken into account when you're doing this then. So unless you make sure, so it makes your CSS and HTML longer, but if you're using gzip, which you should be, it's going to even out at the end. And I actually kind of played around with this maybe about a week ago just to make sure I wasn't kind of blowing smoke up your butt. And I kind of did a real-world test versus sprites versus gzip, CSS, and HTML. And the difference was the gzip HTML had maybe a kilobyte difference in my test. Obviously, that's going to be different based on your image and everything like that. But it saves an HTTP request, and it's a pain in the butt. Sad face. But once again, Sass and Compass to the rescue, can handle it. just be aware of IE8 and test everything on IE8, damn it. Because IE8 is out there. You know, a lot of people are still on IE8, which kind of stinks. Yeah, it really is. Like I look at my work's website, probably 50% of our traffic is IE8. And I'm not joking. A lot of it, so I work with an organization that works a lot with schools. So we have a lot of public schools, private schools, and stuff like that. And when I look at the analytics, it makes me sad. So, all right, spread your HTTP requests across multiple servers. This is something that IE8 supports and everybody else supports. So, if you're using a CDN, your HTTP requests, it can do 8 parallel HTTP requests from your server, and meanwhile do the one from the other server. And so you got 7. That's an improvement. This is just like a little thing. You can load jQuery from the Google CDN, which
What
is
module is that?
what's that?
What module is that?
This is just in the template.
Bastard.
Oh yeah, bastard. Yeah, that's like my I have like this really crappy not a base thing but kind of a starter thing app on GitHub, and you can see it right here. I call it bastard because it's a lonely bastard. Anyway, so this is in the template.php, and it basically takes out your jQuery 1.44 and replaces it with the Google CDN of that, and that's it. You know, and as an added benefit, you know your browser may have that Google's jQuery cache. You know, because a lot of people do this. So spread your stuff across multiple servers. So this is another crappy meme. So CDNs can spread across multiple servers, and they can put those assets closer to you. And if you can do it, do it. So you can see like this is one server, static.yourcdn.com, static2.yourcdn.com. Each of those it can do parallel 6 parallel connections to this, 6 parallel connections to this, 6 parallel connections to the other, and bam, at that point you don't have to worry about that too much. Lowering your bandwidth is important. So make sure your host is gzipping your static assets. When I say static assets, I'm talking about fonts too. Make sure they're able to be cached by the browsers. And when I say that, also fonts, because a lot of times your host's rules will not turn that on by default. Optimize your images. Use an image API optimizer module that we talked about earlier, or you can do it manually. If you're using just kind of a square picture, you don't have any transparency, a lot of times JPEGs will provide a little bit of cost savings. Don't use a lot of images, if you can. And don't load unnecessary images in mobile. If you have a big background image, don't load that for your mobile website, because your mobile website, the content, they're not really going to be able to see it. And it's just, why? And there's a couple other modules I don't even talk about in here. There's a couple different ways to serve mobile users different smaller pictures. You know, there's a great module called Client-Side Adaptive Image, where you can it will use JavaScript to detect your screen size on whatever computer you're doing and serve the appropriate image. There's another one that I haven't played around with called Borealis that can do something similar, and supposedly requires a lot less configuration. But I haven't played around with that one, but I'm going to. All right, so this is one of my favorites right here. Efficient HTML markup with Drupal. Clean your HTML and your CSS will follow. This is a smart person at Alyssa Park, which is a great web design blog. Not so easy to do in Drupal. So you can create your own base theme, like that bastard. What I'm doing, that's what I'm using. Don't get stuck with unnecessary wrapper elements. Omega. So Omega does that, and a couple others. There's a couple other base themes, like the HTML5 base theme is really basic, and that's really semantic. That's awesome. There is the Aurora base theme, which is really awesome because it integrates Asset Compass and all that. there's was it Martin, whatever his name is, from Denmark. He has his mothership base name, and that strips out all the markup. Has a lot of GUI tools in there though. And then you can modify your views to output your semantic HTML elements, which you can do by default or manually, or you can use the fences module. Has anyone here installed the fences module or used it? A couple. It's awesome. So what the fences module will do is when you're modifying your field, say I'm modifying, a date field, title field, or whatever, I can tell it to use whatever wrapper element I want, whether it be H2, H3, div, aside, all the fancy new HTML5 elements. And then it'll actually kind of keep that when you're outputting in views too, which is really super nice. Efficient CSS markup. I consider myself more of a front-end developer than anything else with Drupal. So this to me kind of came as a surprise, and I learned about 6 months ago that I was doing stuff the wrong way. And so limit the nesting of your selectors. So when your browser is interpreting your CSS file, it actually works from the right to the left. The longer it has to go, the more work it has to do. And don't use the elements as a selector. If it has to, your browser is going to start on the A. It has to look at all the A's. Then it has to look at a list item. Then it has to look at all the list items. The UL, and it takes a lot more processing power, which, although happens in the blink of an eye, like on slower computers, aka your crappy phone, your crappy old iPhone 3, it will actually cost, and that's super important. Don't use your elements as selectors if you can. This is bad. This is actually really bad. So and then use this right here, main navigation, set your font, as opposed to this. Why do you even need to do that? Then CSS3 selectors, I use them. Everybody uses them. They're super important and useful. Your nth child, last child. But they also cost. So if you can, limit them. Something that's really important that it kind of this all fits into is the whole idea of SMACs for CSS, scalable modular architecture for CSS, and kind of what they talk about is organizing your CSS and putting a class on a lot of stuff and organizing that. And that if you're putting a class on everything, which you can do through like the block cache module or block class module and a couple other different things, you can reference this stuff directly. And it fits into that workflow, which is pretty positive. Efficient JavaScript. Pay attention to your JavaScript performance. Duh. JavaScript execution can take approximately 10 times longer on mobile devices. All right, we kind of know that. There's a couple of resources I'm going to link to here on asynchronous and deferred JavaScript execution. And this article right here on JS Perf, where you can kind of put your you can kind of run your JavaScript and compare them together. So this cat right here symbolizes someone not knowing exactly what they're doing, and that's why this is kind of like a gloss. Like I wanted to really mention JavaScript, but I'm not a JavaScript expert by any means. I can write some jQuery, and that's about it. So a lot of the stuff that I linked to right here is really important, but a little bit over my head. But that being said, it needs to be taken into account, and I'm going to link to Steve Souders' web pages that lead performance engineer from Google. That guy has so much on his website; it's fantastic. Chrome tools. I found this. Who here is familiar with Google Chrome tools? All right, a couple. I'm glad a couple aren't, because I'm going to talk a little bit about it. I'm going to talk about mostly the net panel and the Google page speed. All right. So this is me logged into the DrupalCamp website, so it'll be a little bit slower. So you can enable Chrome tools. My favorite method is by hitting the F12 button. And you can also go into your, somewhere in here it is. Just look for it. I don't even know.
Tools?
Tools, yeah, whatever. or the easiest way, if you're looking for a selector, right click on something, go to inspect element. And of course it can go into your bottom of your stuff and you can look at this, and this is really good for CSS development. And did you know you can actually kind of integrate this into Sass, so it will tell you the line number of on your Sass file if you Google that. But what I want to talk to you about is the network panel. So I'm going to refresh it, and it's going to try to get this thing from the server. Wow, the server's going slow. This is really good. All right, so if you guys can see this right here, I'm going to show you a couple different things. All right, so my first request right here was just to FLDrupalCamp.org. This took 4.82 seconds for it to give me a response back. Now I'm logged in right now, so I'm not going through Varnish. If I was anonymous and logged out, I'd probably get it under seconds. But 4.2 seconds is kind of slow. Part of that reason is that 160 modules that I showed you earlier. So let's go down right here. You can see that I believe the blue line right here is when the DOM loaded. That's when you can actually kind of see the web page. So DOM loaded in about 6 seconds. It says 5.98 seconds. So everything loaded right here in 50 seconds. Wow, that's awesome. Is that 50? No.
Looks like it's in timeouts.
Yeah, something like that. But everything kind of looks about 13 seconds right there when you're looking at the lines. So 13 seconds, that's a really long time, in my opinion. So let's kind of get into this a little bit here. You can look at you can go on these tabs at the bottom. You can look at documents, your style sheets, your images, your scripts, fonts. This is all super important when you're troubleshooting this type of stuff. You can, once again, you can see at the very bottom right here, I had 74 page requests, and the total amount transferred right here was 841 kilobytes. And that's kind of after I got my hands on it and did some optimizations. We're using some of those inline images. We're using, we're not using image sprites because we're using inline images. We're also aggregating and all that good stuff. So 841, that's a lot. We are doing some image optimization. So you can click on every single kind of one of well, there's a couple things I'm going to look at here. Look at these CSS files right here. You can see two different values right there. So this CSS file right here, you have two values. You have a 31K, and then you have 149K. So right there, that tells you that the host is compressing my CSS before it transfers. It's gzipping it and sending 31K instead of 149K. That's good. It's not going to do that in images because images are already compressed. I'm going to log out right here, and I'm going to do this again in Varnish. And I'm going to show you some of the HTTP headers here. So the website right here in Varnish was loading in 164 milliseconds. Am I running late here? Okay, crap. All right. Long story short here, let's look at the HTTP request right here. You're actually going to see Varnish in here. That's how you know it's working. It says Varnish. All right. Getting back to the resources here, I'm going to give you some resources because we're almost done. General resources, high performance groups.drupal.org. This is really great. Just subscribe, you're going to get notifications, and you will learn. Beginner's Guide to Caching Data in Drupal 7. If you're a module developer, Jeff Eaton has this great article that will tell you how to cache your data. All these will be up on the slides too. Top 10 Drupal performance tips. It's on Net Magazine. Good information up there. DrupalCon Sydney, which happened just a couple months ago. Performance Tough Love. Going into Backend Resources, an overview of performance and scalability by Nate Hogg. This is up on Drupalize Me, who are a sponsor. This video is fantastic. It's an hour-long video given by Nate Hogg. He works for Lullabot, works on Grammy.com, which you can imagine the amount of spikes of traffic that I guess on Grammy night, and is also the maintainer of a number of different modules that everybody uses. Every damn thing on this entire website, 2bits.com. That website is fantastic. Talks about 2 different competing cloud computing platforms, Zen and Virtuoso. Why one is faster than the other? I'm not going to tell you. You're going to have to go. And front-end resources. High performance website blog, Steve Souders. That guy's amazing. Presentation, even faster websites by the same dude. Simple stuff to make our websites faster by Chris Collier, who is one of my heroes. CSS Tricks, awesome website. And in closing, after party tonight, if you're going to Drupal Portland, I'm going hiking and we're inviting everybody. And I'm on Twitter. Is that it? That's it. Thank you.